Chapter 11. Trouble Spots. The next morning after breakfast, as soon as Crystal had washed her dishes and disappeared into the bathroom, Nicky raced upstairs. She hooked Otis to his leash and flew down the stairs again. She tiptoed past Crystal's room, where she heard the roar of the hairdryer, and zipped out the back door. At the far end of the garden, she looped Otis's leash around the trunk of a tree. "Now, Otis," she said, "try to be quiet. I'll come back for you as soon as I can." Inside again, past Crystal's room, this time she heard the psst psst of the hairspray, up the stairs to the nursery. She hid the dog dishes and the dog food in a box of old toys in the closet, tore down the blanket that they'd hung over the door, and then came Crystal's steps on the stairs and her voice calling, "Are you up there?" Nicky showed her the two storage rooms first. "Oh, horrors," said Crystal, looking at the cobwebby trunks and boxes and suitcases. "It's true that they never threw anything away. Just looking at it gives me a headache." She went toward the nursery. "What's in here?" "I've been sort of staying in here," Nicky said. Crystal strode in. She gazed at the rugs, the blankets hung on the walls, the rocking chair, and the lamps. "I did it," Nicky said. "I wanted to make it cozy." Crystal smiled at her. "Well, it is cozy," she said. "It's actually quite a nice room. It smells a little funny, though." She wrinkled her nose. "Probably there are rats up under the roof. Let's let some air in." She went to the window and thrust it open. The sound of barking and whining floated up from below, but Crystal paid no attention. "When we get ready to put the house on the market," she said, "we can sell this as a perfect space for a home gym, or maybe a media center. Screen over there." She raised her hands, measuring a wall-sized screen. "Theater seats here. Could be quite lovely. What do you think?" But she didn't pause to hear what Nicky thought, which was that she didn't like any of those ideas. She went right on to say that she would decide what to do about all this later. But today, since it was Sunday, and she couldn't do much shopping, she was going to take a drive with Len. "I don't suppose you want to come," she said. "Who's Len?" said Nicky. "The real estate agent." "Oh," said Nicky. "No, I don't want to come." Once Crystal had left, Nicky rescued Otis from the back garden and played with him for a long time to make up for his exile. The shoe they'd been using for a toy had turned into a shapeless wad by now, so Nicky found an ancient yellow tennis ball in the closet. Otis adored it. He had to stretch his jaws wide apart to hold it, which made him look as if he was trying to swallow a grapefruit. When Otis lost interest in chasing the ball and settled down to gnaw on it, Nicky decided that today would be her day to explore Yonwood. It was going to be her home, after all, if she accomplished her goal number 1. And while she was at it, she would keep her eyes open for sinners and trouble spots and anything that had a feeling of wrongness. If she was going to accomplish goal number 3, she needed to understand all of this. She would keep her eyes open for Martin, too. She might happen to run into him somewhere, and they might happen to talk to each other. She needed to find out if he was someone she could fall in love with. Goal number 2. So far, she couldn't tell. He was nice looking. He was friendly, sort of. That was enough for a start. She walked to the upper end of Main Street, where the school was, empty today because it was Sunday. Though it was still cold and windy, the sun was out. Some boys were shooting baskets in the schoolyard. She looked to see if Martin was one of them, but he wasn't. A few blocks farther on, and she was in downtown Yonwood. A few stores were open, but their lights were still off. They looked uninviting, like dim caves. Small clusters of people gathered in places where a TV was on, showing the news. Nicky heard snippets as she passed by. "5 days remaining until the deadline," said the president's voice from the cozy corner cafe. "Ambassador has been assassinated," he said, from the newsstand. "Group calling itself the Warriors of God has claimed," he said from the drugstore. The familiar nervous feeling started up in Nicky's stomach as she heard these words, and she could tell that other people were nervous too. A woman behind her was talking about how the tension was just killing her, and another woman answered that it was killing her too, but that they had to have faith that they'd be all right. And the first person said, yes, she did believe that, but she just wished everyone did. Nikki hurried on, not wanting to hear any more. Half a block down, she suddenly heard the strange hum she'd heard before. Where was it coming from? A machine inside a building? Some kind of car or engine on the street? She looked around but saw nothing. The hum grew slightly louder. Was it behind the grocery store? She peered up a narrow alley and thought she saw someone darting across the other end, but she wasn't sure. The hum faded. Nikki turned around. Behind her were two of the people who'd been watching the president at the drugstore a minute ago, a short, bald man and a gray-haired woman. "Did you hear that funny sound?" she said. "Do you know what it was?" Neither one answered. They kept on walking. The man cast a suspicious glance at her, and the woman pressed her lips together and shook her head. The woman stopped and glared at her. "You should know," she said. "Why don't you know?" "Whose child are you?" But she didn't wait for an answer. She reached for the man's arm, and they hastened away. Nikki felt as if she'd been slapped. She wasn't supposed to ask about the hum, that was clear. But why not? How was she supposed to find out if she didn't ask? She went on. Toward the end of Main Street, she came to the grocery store, and beyond that was the church she'd seen when she and Crystal had first arrived. The Church of the Fiery Vision, the sign had said, but she could also make out the old name that had been crossed out, Yonwood Community Church. Today, the sign also said, "Today's Sermon, Pulling Together in Dark Times." A lot of people were gathered here, milling about and greeting one another in low voices. Many of them were wearing the round blue button she'd first seen on Mrs. Beeson. The doors of the church stood open, and beside them was a thin-faced man dressed in a sort of robe, dark blue with a white border. Was that the Reverend Loomis? Nikki wondered. She saw Mrs. Beeson standing near him, though she almost didn't recognize her at first, because Mrs. Beeson wasn't wearing a woolly gray hat like an upside-down bowl, and her hair was brushed and fluffy instead of in a ponytail. She spoke to all the people as they went inside. Nikki waved to her, and Mrs. Beeson flashed her a smile. Nikki turned around and walked back the way she'd come, but on the other side of the street this time. She noticed a few things might be examples of wrongness. By the park, she saw an old man spitting on the sidewalk. Surely that was a wrong thing to do. She also saw an angry little boy pulling a cat's tail. She told him not to, and he scowled at her. It was wicked to hurt animals, but was it wicked if a 6-year-old did it? She wasn't sure. In the alley beside the boarded-up movie theater, she saw 3 teenage girls smoking. She wasn't sure about that one either. Was it bad to smoke? Or only bad before a certain age? She would ask Mrs. Beeson. For a few minutes, she followed along behind a group of kids to see if they were being cruel to each other, the way kids sometimes were. She saw some teasing and a little roughhousing, but nothing much. She looked for Martin in this group, but he wasn't there. When she was back where she had started, at the north end of Main Street, she headed downhill. The houses were farther apart here than in Greenhaven's neighborhood, and smaller. She saw a woman sitting on her front porch reading the paper. A few children played ball in the street. No one was doing anything wrong, as far as she could tell. Really, Yonwood seemed like a very good town, so much better than dirty, crime-riddled Philadelphia. Following the words of the prophet must be working. Farther on, she came to what looked at first like a big, wild, vacant lot. A high fence ran alongside it, and beyond the fence grew tall, unkempt trees. After 100 yards or so, she came to a gravel drive with a mailbox beside it. H. McCoy, 600 Raven Road, was printed in black paint on the mailbox, and a no trespassing sign was nailed to a tree. She recognized the name McCoy. Mrs. Beeson had mentioned this person. He was the one she was worried about for some reason. She peered up the driveway. At the end, rising from a tangle of trees and rangy shrubs, she could just glimpse the peak of a roof. Tree branches threw shadows across it, and the shadows danced in the wind like long, thin ghosts. Should she go in there and see what H. McCoy was up to? Not today, she thought. Some other time. She walked on. A block or so farther on, an alley led off Raven Road, really more of a wide path, rutted and unpaved. It went behind the houses on Trillium Street. Curious, Nicky turned that way. From the alley, she could see into backyards. Most of them were empty and quiet. At one house, she heard loud voices through an open window. She paused a moment to listen. The people inside were insulting each other and swearing. Surely that was bad. Did it mean they counted as sinners? At the next house, a wire fence bordered the alley. Beyond the fence, she could see the gnarled, bare branches of fruit trees, and beyond those, the back of a house that badly needed a coat of paint. Just inside the fence, so close to the alley that she could have touched it if she wanted to, stood a shed made of weather-worn planks. At this place, there was a lot going on. Two small children charged around among the tree trunks, yelling at each other. One of them had a toy truck that the other seemed to want, and he chased his brother wildly, falling down on skids of slippery leaves, shrieking the whole time. A window in the back of the house opened, and an old woman stuck her head out and cried, "You kids quit that!" But the kids paid no attention. Nicky watched them, peeking out from behind the shed so she wouldn't be noticed. The shrieking boy finally grabbed the truck away from the other boy, and that boy wailed furiously. Another child appeared, a girl, maybe 4 or 5 years old, and scolded the boy who was crying. And then a bigger boy, closer to Nicky's age, burst out the back door. He had curly blonde hair, big ears, and a strong, skinny body. The boy leapt down the porch steps. "Hey, Roddy, lost your truck?" he called. "Want an airplane instead?" And he took hold of the little boy's hands and whirled him around so he flew off the ground, squealing with laughter. "Fly me," said the other boy, and the big boy did. He flew the girl too. Then he said, "Now all of you quit making such a racket. There's plenty of toys inside. Go on." "But I want," the little boy started to wail. "Go on," said the big boy, "and leave me alone." Nicky expected that he'd disappear back into the house, but instead, he came toward the shed at the end of the yard. She ducked down quickly. He fiddled with the door for a moment. Maybe it was locked. She couldn't see. And then opened it and went inside. Nicky should probably have left at this point. She had no reason to think that this was a trouble spot. But as usual, curiosity took hold of her. What was the boy doing in this falling down shed? Because the shed backed up against the fence, and because there was a dusty window in the back of the shed, just the right height for looking into, she might be able to see in without being noticed. She put her eye to the glass. End of chapter 11. Okay, that chapter was kind of boring, not gonna lie. There wasn't much happening. We literally just followed Nicky along a walk in town. But I think it'll get better. I think it'll get better. Oh, good girl. I have to make sure Luna's being okay with the Christmas tree. I think she's gonna go take a nap. All right. Is everybody cozy up and ready for chapter 12? I am. All right. Chapter 12. Inside the backyard shed. It was Sunday morning, and for once a sunny day. Grover's father was in the garage, getting ready to change the oil in the car. His mother had gone to church. Grover finally had some time to himself. When the little kids had finished their breakfast, he shooed them outside. "Get out there and tear around," he said. "There's sun today, but it might be gone tomorrow." They charged into the backyard, and he sat with Granny Carey at the kitchen table while she finished her cup of coffee. He contemplated his grandmother. She was wearing a plaid flannel shirt this time of morning, with an old green sweatshirt over it, and orange sweatpants with thick fuzzy socks, and her duck slippers. Her short white hair was so wispy that her pink scalp showed through. "Going to sit out on the porch this morning," she said. "Take in some sun." You better wear a hat, Grover said. It's chilly out there. I will, she said. I've got that nice green and yellow one your mother knitted me. Grover smiled to himself. His grandmother didn't care a bit what she looked like. She'd happily wear 15 different colors, all clashing with each other. She sometimes looked like a heap of bright laundry, with a little wrinkly walnut head on top. His mother was always trying to get her to spiff up, but Grover thought she looked fine the way she was, completely different from every other old lady in town. From outside came 5 or 6 piercing shrieks. Granny Carey rose from the table and hoisted up the window by the back door. "You kids quit that," she yelled. More shrieks followed, and then a wail. "I'll go deal with them," Grover said. "I'm going out there anyway." He took his jacket from its hook by the back door and went out into the yard. For a few minutes he fooled around with the kids, and then he shooed them back into the house and went down to his shed. If the kids behaved, and if his father didn't call him to help with the car, he'd have at least an hour, maybe more, all to himself. The shed's door was fastened with a combination lock, its combination known only to him. He twirled it open and went inside, closing the door behind him. And as soon as he was in there, he became, as always, a different Grover. Not the funny Grover, not the big brother Grover, but the serious, brilliant, totally focused Grover, pursuing his passion. A few rusted garden tools still hung on one of the walls of the shed, but he'd cleaned out all the old broken flower pots and half-empty boxes of plant food and bags of moldy potting soil that used to be in here. Along one side of the shed, he had built a wide shelf, and on the shelf were 2 glass tanks, each equipped with lights and sitting on a heating pad where he kept his prized possessions, his snakes. He bent down and peered into each tank in turn. "How are you doing, my little beauties?" he murmured. Both snakes were barely visible. They burrowed under the dry leaves and bark he'd put in the tanks for shelter. All he could see was a small patch of patterned scales pressed against the glass in one tank, and the narrow tip of a tail lying across a twig in the other. He checked the temperature in the tanks. 86 degrees for one, 80 for the other. Just right. Then he raised the glass top of the tank on the left and set it down on the shelf. He reached inside in a slow, unstartling way, and he took hold of the snake gently, a few inches behind its head, and raised it up into the air. It curved and whipped, looping itself into an S, and then a J, and then an S again, flowing like a moving rope between Grover's hands. It was a gorgeous creature, nearly 2 feet long. Rings of black and yellow and rusty red alternated all down its slim body. It looked like a beaded belt, except that at the top end was a head with glittering black eyes and a darting tongue like a sliver of black paper. "Pretty soon," said Grover, "I'll have some dinner for you. Maybe tomorrow, or the next day, something delicious." He held up the snake and looked at it in the eye. "Okay?" This snake's name was Fang. He'd found it during the summer, sleeping at the base of a rock in the woods. It was the first milk snake he'd captured, and he was very pleased with it. For nearly 8 months now, he'd kept it alive and healthy. Fortunately, it didn't have to be fed very often during the winter. Finding food for it wasn't easy, and he couldn't always afford to order from the reptile supply company. Of the dozens of snakes he'd captured in the last 3 years or so, he'd kept this one the longest. If he couldn't find food for his snakes, or if they started to look sickly, he always let them go. Grover was on his way to being a snake expert. 4 years ago, a snake had come out of the bushes and crossed the path in front of him as he was walking in the mountains. He had stopped and watched as it slithered along, moving without legs, swimming without water. A creature built all in one line, strange and beautiful, and, to him, thrilling rather than frightening. He'd been 9 years old at the time. The whole rest of that summer, he'd scrambled around in the woods, looking under rocks and logs and in holes in the ground, hoping to find a snake to take home with him, so that he could see it up close and watch it live its life. He went to the library and got out books about snakes, and on the library computer, he went on the internet and found endless pages of information and pictures. Before long, his head was packed with snake knowledge. For a while, he talked to everyone about his new passion, his parents, his grandmother, his friend Martin, but his parents were too busy to be very interested, and Martin didn't understand how he could care about such dirty, slimy things. Only his grandmother really listened. She thought it was a fine idea to collect snakes, as long as he didn't ever show them to her. She said she would scream like a fire engine if any snake got close to her. So now Grover kept his snakes to himself. He fixed up the shed. His father didn't have time for gardening anymore, so he didn't mind. And he used every penny he could earn on snake supplies. So far, he had found, kept, and released 37 snakes. Only 2 had died in his care. He knew all the kinds of snakes around where he lived. Now his ambitions had grown. He had a plan. All he needed to make it happen was money, and he was working on that. Success was near. He told this to his snake. "Success is near, Fang," he said. "Really, no doubt about it. You'll see." With the hand that wasn't holding Fang, he took the lid off the other tank. This tank held Licorice Whip, his young red belly snake. He'd had it only a few weeks. It was the thickness of a slender cord, about a foot long. He lifted it out. He held the 2 snakes up, one in each hand, and gazed at them as they wove among his fingers and coiled around his wrists, sliding their cool, dry skin against his skin, raising their small, elegant heads and staring back at him, almost as if they were about to speak. Then, suddenly he heard a noise, a soft thump against the wall of the shed, and a rustling. He shifted his gaze to the dusty window, just in time to see something move quickly on the other side. Someone was out there. As fast as he could, he set the snakes back in their tanks and put the lids on. Then he dashed out and ran along the fence to the gate that led out the alley. Up ahead, going around the curve, someone was running. But it was too far away to see who. He didn't try to give chase. Probably it was Martin, who used to be his friend, trying to catch him doing something forbidden. He didn't bother to run after him. He went back to his shed. "What is the matter with that guy?" he said to Fang and Licorice Whip. "Seems like he's out to get me." He took Fang out of his tank, draped him around his shoulders, and started in on the task of cleaning tanks. But after he'd been working 20 minutes or so, he heard footsteps outside. The door of the shed opened, and his father leaned in. "Got an emergency job to do," he said. "Leaky pipe. I'm going to need your help." Grover sighed. He put Fang back in his tank, and after locking up the shed, followed his father back to the house. End of chapter 12. Grover was always my favorite Muppet on Sesame Street. Aw. Wait. Grover... Is Grover the one that tap dances? He's cool. He's cool. I think I always liked Elmo, but that's because I was really, really little. Whew. Definitely tired today. I can feel it. I can feel it. Reading is actually so relaxing, though. It's like a really good thing to do when you're not feeling well. So I don't mind at all. I don't know how many chapters we're going to read today. Probably not too many, just to kind of save my voice, but we'll see. Are you feeling it now, Mr. Krabs? Oh my gosh. I did love SpongeBob. I did love SpongeBob. A lot. A lot. Okay. I think that's a sign to keep reading. So, here we go. Chapter 13. The Perfect Living Room. Nikki had bumped against the shed by accident when her foot slipped on a stone. She'd seen the boy's face turn toward the window, and she dashed away, going up the hill toward town, running until she was sure no one was following her. What she'd seen in the shed had given her a chill. The boy holding the snakes up in both hands and gazing at them so ardently. The snakes twisting in the dim air, their black tongues flicking in and out. She'd never seen a live snake before. Weren't most snakes poisonous? Wouldn't it be dangerous to have snakes in a place where there were little children? She felt a surge of excitement. This might truly be a trouble spot. She reminded herself of Mrs. Beeson's words. A sense of wrongness. Sometimes you can just feel it. The boy with the snakes definitely gave her a strange, creepy feeling. She walked faster. Mrs. Beeson would be home from church by now. She would go straight to her house. She had a lot to ask her about. Mrs. Beeson's doorbell had 3 bell-like notes. Ting, ting, tong. After Nikki rang it, she waited nervously. Maybe you were supposed to have an appointment to talk to Mrs. Beeson? But the door opened, and there she was. She had no hat on, but she was still in her church outfit, and she had her DATT phone clapped up to her ear. Sausage came trotting up behind her and sniffed at Nikki's shoes. "Just a sec, Ralph," Mrs. Beeson said into the phone. She smiled at Nikki. "Come in, honey," she said. "I'll be off the phone in a jiff." Nikki walked in. As she waited, she noticed again the round blue button pinned to Mrs. Beeson's sweater. What was that little picture on it? It seemed to be a tall, narrow building, like... Of course, it was a tower, and the Prophet's name was Althea Tower. "So, Ralph," Mrs. Beeson said into the phone, "you just have to trust me on this. We have to get everyone behind us. And if we need to use unusual measures, well, then we do. These are unusual times." She paused. I know, but that's what she said, I'm sure." "Uh-huh." "All right. See you later." She set down her phone and turned to Nikki. "Come right in here," she said, leading the way into the living room. Nikki was curious to see if Mrs. Beeson's house was as perfect on the inside as it was on the outside. It was. Mrs. Beeson had the coziest and neatest living room Nikki had ever seen. A fat white couch sat opposite fat blue armchairs. A coffee table held a plate of cookies and 3 books neatly stacked, the top one black with gold letters on the front, probably a holy book of some sort. Three pictures hung on the walls. One was a beautiful scene of a mountain lake, one was a color photograph of Sausage, and one was a photograph of a freckle-faced young man in a soldier's uniform. "My husband," Mrs. Beeson said, "killed 22 years ago in the 5-Nation War, fighting against our enemies." A vase of artificial roses stood on the mantel, and next to it a box in the shape of a heart. There was no mess at all. No sweaters draped over chair backs, no flopped open magazines, no shoes left on the floor, no stuff scattered anywhere. It was just the opposite of Greenhaven. A jingly tune was playing softly, but Nikki couldn't tell where it was coming from. "Mrs. Beeson," she said, "I need to ask you about some things." "Very good," said Mrs. Beeson. "Have a seat. Help yourself to a cookie." Nikki sat on the white couch. Mrs. Beeson was about to sit down across from her when suddenly a soft roar started up, and a little dome-shaped machine rolled into the room. Sausage skittered frantically and jumped onto Mrs. Beeson's lap. "Don't mind the robot vacuum," said Mrs. Beeson. "Just lift up your feet when it comes close. It makes Sausage a bit nervous, but I think it's marvelous. I've programmed it to do the whole house every other day." Nikki watched, fascinated, as the vacuum trundled back and forth across the floor. "It's cute," she said. She took a cookie from the plate. "It is, isn't it?" said Mrs. Beeson. "I found many of the new gadgets so helpful, like my little DATT phone. It can take pictures, send email, record TV, get instant news, identify poisonous substances, tell one fingerprint from another. All kinds of useful things." Now, if it could just detect wrongdoing, said Mrs. Beeson, laughing. What a help that would be. She scratched Sausage's ears. So, you have something to ask me? Yes, I do. Nicky set down her half-eaten cookie and told Mrs. Beeson about the old shed and the boy with the snakes twining around his arms. I wasn't sure if he would count as a sinner or not. Snakes, said Mrs. Beeson. She lifted a foot as the robot vacuum rolled beside her chair. Where was this? Nicky told her. Interesting, said Mrs. Beeson. I've been reading a great deal of spiritual literature these last months, and I haven't come across one good word about snakes. Some other things, too, I wondered about, Nicky said. Spitting on the sidewalk and pulling a cat's tail and smoking. I wasn't sure about the cat or the smoking. It was a little boy hurting the cat and some teenagers in the park smoking. Mrs. Beeson nodded, frowning. And some people were yelling in a house on Trillium Street, Nicky went on. It sounded like a bad fight, but I didn't hear what it was about. What address? Mrs. Beeson asked. Nicky described the house. And, she said, suddenly inspired, you know that man Hoyt McCoy? Mrs. Beeson leaned forward. The vacuum had moved on to another room now, so she set Sausage back down on the floor. Yes, what about him? When I passed his house, Nicky said, I kind of peeked up the drive, and I saw strange shadows, like black ghosts or something, hovering around outside. It made me feel creepy. Mm-hmm, said Mrs. Beeson. Very interesting indeed. I know it's bad to spy, Nicky said, and bad to eavesdrop, and to look in the window at the boy with the snakes. I probably shouldn't have done it, but... Mrs. Beeson held up a hand. She looked Nicky straight in the eye. For a moment, she didn't speak. And Nicky heard again the jingly tune that the noise of the vacuum had covered up. You did well, Mrs. Beeson said. Her voice was solemn. Listen, honey, I want you to remember this. When you know what you're doing is God's work, then you're willing to do anything. I mean anything. A shiver like a miniature lightning bolt shot through Nicky's middle, right beneath her ribs. Anything, if it's God's work? She thought. Yes, that's what it has to be. That's what it is to be a holy person. You're willing to do anything. She thought of stories she'd heard about saints who let themselves be killed in awful ways. She thought about the brave characters in the books she loved, how they faced monsters and crossed flaming mountains, and did not live by the rules of ordinary people. And it wasn't out of the question for someone as young as herself to be like them. Often, at least in books, it was a child who vanquished the darkness. She could be like that. She felt a great, fierce desire to bring goodness to the world, or at least to Yonwood. Mrs. Beeson stood up. Sausage got up too. What a help you are, honey, Mrs. Beeson said. I think you and I have the same thing in mind. A bright, clean world where everyone knows how to behave. Wouldn't it be splendid? Nicky nodded, imagining it. Everyone kind, everyone good. No creepiness, no wars. So the more of these trouble spots we can find, the better off we'll be, Mrs. Beeson went on, her voice becoming very stern. Remember what I said about how one moldy strawberry can ruin the whole basket? We're not going to let that happen. We're going to make this a good and godly town through and through. She bent over and swept the crumbs of Nicky's cookie into her hand. And I'll tell you frankly, honey, I'm the one to get it done. I may look like a dumpling, but I have a spine of steel. Are you a preacher, Mrs. Beeson? Nicky asked. No, I'm retired. But I can't just sit around, can I? That's not my way. She laughed. I coach girls baseball in the spring. I lead a study group at the church. Organize Yonwood's spring cleanup. Might even run for mayor someday. I like to wear a lot of different hats. They headed for the hall, where several of Mrs. Beeson's different hats hung from a tree-shaped hat rack. I keep hearing music, Nicky said. Where's it coming from? Oh, said Mrs. Beeson, smiling. It's my music box. She darted back into the living room and picked up the heart-shaped box from the mantel. It's very high-tech, powered by some new kind of tiny everlasting battery. Plutonium, I think? It just goes and goes. Isn't it charming? Yes, said Nicky. Mrs. Beeson opened the front door and ushered her out. Thank you so much, she said. Anything else you notice, you just come and let me know. She beamed at Nicky, and Nicky glowed. Afterward, though, she felt a tiny bit guilty. She hadn't really seen ghosts hovering around Hoyt McCoy's house, or anything bad at all. She just had a feeling about the place. But everything else she'd said was true. Maybe that made up for one small fib. As she came through Greenhaven's front door, the telephone rang. She picked it up and said hello, and Amanda's voice answered. Oh, good, it's you. I just remembered something. I still have the house key. I ought to bring it back. Okay, Nicky said. Come whenever you want. And Amanda, anything new about the Prophet? Is she better? No, she's just the same. Really sad and quiet. Keeps on saying stuff you can't figure out. Sometimes she wanders off. Wanders off? Yeah, it's almost like she's walking in her sleep. She just goes out in the yard, or even out the front door, and I have to go quick and get her and bring her back. Is she trying to go somewhere? I don't know. And I still can't come and meet her because I'm so interested, Amanda. Maybe I could tell what she's saying. I doubt it, said Amanda. If Mrs. Beeson can't tell, I don't see how you could. Well, okay, maybe not, Nicky said, but I'd like to just see her sometime. What does she look like? She looks sick, all shadowy around the eyes. Amanda sounded impatient. I have to go. Nicky spent the next hour or so roaming around Greenhaven. She loved being here alone. She burrowed through the silent rooms like a miner hunting for gold. What she wanted was anything old, and especially anything written. From desk drawers and closet shelves and the backs of cabinets, and from the trunks and boxes in the third-floor rooms, she pulled out packets of letters, programs from long-ago theater performances, journals and ledger books, and guest lists and postcards. She sat on the floor reading until the air around her felt thick with the past. All these words, written so long ago, seemed to say to her, "Remember us. We were here. We were real." She kept Otis nearby. If she was sitting on the floor, he pushed his nose against her arm, wanting to be petted. He tugged at the leg of her pants, wanting to play. Sometimes he slept, stretched out, belly to the rug, his rear legs flopped behind him like a frog's. And then he would wander off, and when Nicky remembered to look for him, she'd find him chewing happily on the corner of a curtain or trying to dig through the hardwood floor. He was all the company she needed. Around 2:30, when Crystal still wasn't back, she decided to take Otis for his afternoon outing. She heard banging as she went down the hall, probably coming from one of the bathrooms. The plumber must be here. She went out through the kitchen to the back garden. To her surprise, the basement door was slightly ajar. The plumber must have gone down there to get at the pipes under the house. Good. She'd be curious about the basement. She could have a look. She picked Otis up, pulled open the door, and peeked in. The plumber had turned on the light. It was dim, just one bulb in the ceiling, but it showed her a flight of stone steps. Holding Otis tightly, she went down. End of chapter 13. All right. Let me see how long the next chapter is, because I think we might just read one more today. One or two. We'll see what time it is, but maybe one or two more, because the one after the next one is pretty short. But hello, Car. Hi, Coco. Hi, Puffy. Welcome in. I see you all came in while I was reading. Happy Monday. How are you all doing? Also, thank you so much for the shout outs. Definitely check out all these wonderful streamers. Also, while I have a moment, Let me also shout out Terror, being so good about shouting everybody else out that I have to give you a shout out yourself. So please go follow all these wonderful streamers. Especially it's around the holidays. Just go give them a follow, especially if you're not following any of them or any of them. I don't know. Car doesn't like shouting me out, so thank you. Oh my goodness. Listen. I usually forget. I'm like the worst shouter outer of all. Car usually remembers. Oh, yes. Thank you for the shout out for Puffy as well. I was going to do that, and then I got distracted. See, I'm the worst shouter outer. I always forget someone or everyone. So, thank you for shouting everyone out. The bagel is safe. Heck yes. All right, I'm going to have one more hydration. We're also pretty close to our follower goal. We only need 57 more followers. I'm hoping we can reach that soon slash next year, within the next year, or within the next like maybe couple months or so. But super excited because I have some fun things coming up for the new year, and merch would be a really, really awesome thing. So I already have some ideas about it, and one day they'll happen. They'll come to life. So hope we get some more follows. We've had a lot of follows this year, though. I never went over my Twitch recap, but let me see if I can pull it up actually, and maybe we can like quickly talk about it. Because we actually had a lot of followers this year, which was awesome. Let me find the email. I could just go on Twitch too, but I feel like this was easier. I don't know why I thought this was easier, but one day, one day. Okay, so let's go over my recap. So, as a streamer, I mostly lose new followers shortly after I get them. Same terror. I do too. I'll always like look a few days later and like one person unfollowed. I'm like, oh, all right, cool. But so we had almost 3,000 hours watched of Coley's Corner. I streamed 110 times in the last year. It says I streamed 5 categories, but I know for a fact there was more than that, so I don't know. In both our cases, their loss. Exactly, exactly. There were 52 clips made in the last year, which is amazing. I remember, I want to say the first like year or so, I don't think I had any clips. Firstly, because I didn't know how to clip. So I was just like highlighting everything and I'm like, oh, but clipping. Then I learned how to clip and we got more and more, and it's just a fun thing. And excuse me, my throat is having a day. One day though, I really want to figure out how to do like, especially on my Be Right Back screen, I would love to have like clips play. I think I know how to do it. But I would have to like get, a montage together, something like that. But I think that would be really cool. That's one of my ideas that I would like to do soon-ish. My top stream in the last year reached 120 viewers. That was probably from a raid. It was probably from a raid, an amazing raid by one of my lovely raider streamer friends. We had over 51,000 chats sent. Top 5 categories, let's see, were Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, Zelda Link's Awakening, Zelda Breath of the Wild, lots of Zelda, Just Chatting, and art. That makes sense. That makes sense. From Raid Shadow Legends? Maybe. Maybe. Three top tags: English, makes sense. Anxiety, makes sense. And Nancy Drew fam, makes sense. Just Chatting and art being the combo breakers. Yep. That was it. That's all we did. That's all we did. No, those were just the top ones. But for emotes, the Korok dance was the top one, used 900 times. Next one is the brows, used almost half that amount, which is crazy. And then after that is the love, the heart one. After that is hype. And then after that is the wave. Bug Snacks was one of my top 5. Oh my gosh. Oh my goodness, Bug Snacks. Car wants me to play that. Car wants me to play that. I didn't really see her stream of it, and I don't think I saw your stream of it. Or like if I did, I saw just little like snips and bits from it. It wasn't like anything to really know what was going on. I just remember I remember seeing the noodler, and I was like instantly I'm like, that's my favorite bug snack, because it was just like the noodler. I thought it was the funniest thing. So that was, it just made me it made it my favorite. Let's see. Our top featured clip was one from Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, when we saw Hestu for the first time and I had my chipmunk voice. That was fun. Bonus achievements. We reached 2 goals in the whole year. We reached 2 goals. Awesome. And I think that's it. I don't know what the other 2 things are. There's like a thumbs up with 3 thumbs, and then there's like a pot with a green star in it. I don't know if those are just pictures to make up for the fact that we didn't have any other achievements, or if those are achievements. I don't know. Let's see. We had 466,000 channel points spent in this channel. We had 222 new followers over the last year. That's amazing. That's amazing. We had 27 new subs. We had 15 gift subs and 9 hype trains. That is awesome. I love that. I love that it tells you all these things. Let's see. We sent over 84 raids out of, we had 110 streams. So that means we only didn't raid like maybe 20 times. We received almost 40 raids, and we got 230 shoutouts. That's awesome. Loudest fans. Okay, I don't know what this means. Does this just mean like they chatted the most, or like loudest fans? I don't know, but we have Goob, we have Sam, we have Coco, we have Matt, we have Car, we have Terror, we have HS, Toonman, and McClellan. You guys are all the loudest fans. It must be like chatting the most, I think. Bug Snacks, Rainbow Billy, Chicory, Cassette Beast, and of course Fall Guys. Of course. Of course. We love Fall Guys Fridays. We love I can't even say it. It's like a tongue twister. Fall Guys Fridays. Thanks for playing. Aw. Okay, why does it say 220 new followers in the recap, but it says 222 in like the actual stats of the recap? That's a little weird. That's a little weird. Anyway, okay, let me see my viewer recap real quick. So I personally, Frall Guys Fridays, exactly. I as a person watched 2,000 hours of Twitch in the last year. on distinctly 354 days. So I only missed like 15, what, 15 days? No, 11 days out of the year I did not go on Twitch. That's a little nuts. My top five, one of them was Fall Guys. Let's see what else. I couldn't get enough of just chatting, Animal Crossing, Marbles on Stream, Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, and Zelda Breath of the Wild. Those were my five most watched categories. The emotes I used the most were Car's little snow globe penguin, her party penguin, my heart emote, my flurry heart, my Korok dance, and my hype. So it was like mine and Car's emotes that I used the most. Oh my gosh, I used. Oh, I bet I know why. I was gonna say I used the penguin snow globe 1,500 times, but that's because I use it during like dance emote chat things. So anytime somebody has like a hype train, a dance party, or like I just want to send out some hype, I use that emote. So that's why that one got used so much. What else? I sent out almost 20,000 chats on Twitch. Let's see. What else? What else? I sent out 8,500 chats as a mod. I took 12 mod actions. I only mod for one channel, so. Bonus achievements, top Twitcher, category champion, and majestic moderator. Awesome. And let's see, the top people I watched were Car, Mother Moon, Jensen, Larry, and Highly in Descent. Very cool, very cool. Your Korok dance emote was one of my top views. Awesome. From seeing my top 5 emote usages, colie Korok dancing emote made it. Oh my god, I love that emote. I love it. We love Koroks, obviously. Oh my gosh, is Larry still here? Wait, is Larry still here? Larry, if you're still here, say hello, because I have something to tell you. If you're not, or if you're lurking, I don't think Larry's still here. Okay, it's fine. It's fine. Then we won't talk about it. Then we won't talk about it. All right. Is that it? Yeah, I think that's it. That's the end of the recap. That is the end of the recap. Cool beans. Cool beans. Okay. Shall we read more? Let's read some more. Number 4 was Car Midge poking. I love that emote too. That's like such a good emote for her. I love it. All right, so we're going to read one more chapter, potentially 2. Because the next one is a good amount, and then the one after that's very short. So we'll see where we're at. But here we go with chapter 14, Someone in the Basement. The basement was huge, a low-ceilinged room that stretched out into shadowy darkness ahead of her and to the left. It wasn't an empty darkness. She could see what appeared to be low hills lurking in the shadows. Another light bulb shone dimly in a far corner. Did that mean someone was down here? One of the workmen, maybe? She thought of calling out, "Anyone here?" But there was something still and heavy about the silence that made her afraid to break it. She would just look around a little, quietly, and then she would climb up the stairs and leave. The air had a smell like the damp, earthy underside of rocks. Once her eyes had adjusted to the dimness, she saw that the hills were piles of furniture, a great crammed-together mass with just a narrow passage winding through it. Tables lay with their feet in the air, and between the feet were other tables and dining-room chairs and stools and chests of drawers, and on top of the chests were more chairs, upside down, making a nest for footstools and mirrors and lamp bases and unidentifiable things covered in sheets. Far back against the wall stood four-poster beds, some piled with 3 or 4 mattresses, and great looming wardrobes with mirrored doors. All of it had turned the same dirty gray color because of the dust that coated it. Cobwebs drifted in long strings from the ceiling, brushing Nicky's face as she walked by. Otis squirmed in her arms. She followed the passage that twisted through all this. It was like walking down a tunnel, almost, because the furniture was stacked shoulder high. She moved toward the light. She heard a scrape and then a rustling sound. She stopped, held her breath, and listened. Was someone in here? She bent down and peered through the forest of furniture legs, but it was too dark to see. Something stirred over by the wall. Wood knocked against wood. A head rose from the jumble of furniture, and a voice spoke. "Pa?" it said. "Is that you?" "No," said Nicky. Her heart jumped, but curiosity kept her from running away. The head ducked down again. There was more scraping and rustling, and then someone crawled out from beneath a big table. A boy with cobwebs in his hair. "I know who you are," the boy said. He held his hands cupped together as if protecting something. "The old guy's granddaughter." "Great-granddaughter," said Nicky. "And who's that?" He nodded at Otis, who was squirming in Nicky's arms. "It's Otis," she said. "I'm taking care of him for somebody. Who are you?" She couldn't see the boy's face. The light was behind him. It cast his huge, blurry shadow onto a cabinet that leaned against the headboard of a bed. "Grover," said the boy, "my pa's fixing your pipes." "But what are you doing down here?" The boy sprang toward her all of a sudden. "Lying in wait," he cried, "for unwary creatures to fall into my trap?" Nicky shrieked and then instantly regretted it, because he laughed to see that he'd scared her. "I already caught one unwary creature," he said. He held up his clasped hands. "It's a prisoner now, awaiting its fate." "What is it?" He stepped toward her, and she stepped back. She couldn't help it. He might have a spider in his hands, and he might be the kind of boy who would suddenly throw it at you. "I'll show you if you're brave enough to look," he said. He stretched out his hands and opened them so she could see what he held. It wasn't a spider. She couldn't tell what it was. Something small and pinkish. Otis strained forward, sniffing madly. She put her hands around his muzzle. "An infant mouse," the boy cried. "There's 8 of them in a nest down there by the heating pipe." "Let me see," said Nicky. "Hold it in the light." He did. It had hairless, almost transparent skin, tiny, twitching paws, and little blind eyes. It was about as big as a quarter. "Why did you steal it?" she asked him. "I need it," he said, "for my snake." "What?" "For my snake, to eat." She looked up at the boy's face, which was framed in blonde curly hair. His ears stuck out. She knew, suddenly, who he was. "You don't believe me?" he said. "I believe you," she said, "but I don't like it." She turned around and started back the way she'd come. He followed her up the stairs and out of the basement. She set Otis down, and he sniffed Grover's shoes with great interest. "Where'd the dog come from?" Grover asked. "I'm just taking care of him for a little while," Nicky said. "He's a secret. Don't tell about him, okay?" Grover tilted his head upward and yelled, "Hey, everybody, guess what? There's a—" Nicky shouted, "Stop it!" He laughed. "I'll keep your secret," he said. "Now you owe me a favor." "Are you really going to give that baby mouse to a snake?" Nicky asked. "Yep." Grover stretched his mouth into a wicked grin. "Because I'm mean and evil," he said, and gave a maniac laugh. "Worse than—" He lowered his voice to a gruesome whisper. "Hoyt McCoy. Have you heard of him?" Nicky nodded, feeling a lurch in her stomach. "Well, I'm much worse than him," Grover said. "You have spider webs in your hair," said Nicky. She turned and walked away from him, through the back door and into the house. What terrible luck, she thought. A boy right here where she could get to know him, and he turns out to be the boy with the snakes. And on top of that, a kidnapper and a murderer of baby mice. She couldn't possibly fall in love with someone like him. She went upstairs again, planning to read until Crystal got home. She switched on the lamp and picked up her great-grandfather's notebook. On the floor beside her, Otis went to sleep and dreamed, making soft little whip-whip noises and fluttering his paws. Nicky read, January 2nd. Legs very weak and painful. Spent the day reading the scientific journals. Intrigued by this notion of extra dimensions. Other worlds right next to ours? Had a chat with M, but of course can't understand a word. What does that mean? She knew about 3 dimensions, up and down and sideways. What were extra dimensions? Who was M? She read on. January 4th. Extraordinary experience last night. Went into the back bedroom to look for scissors. Thought I saw someone in there, over by the bed. Dark-haired figure, transparent swirl of skirt. Dreadful feeling of sorrow hit me like a wave. Had to grab the doorknob, almost fell. Figure faded, vanished. Maybe something wrong with my eyes? Or heart. He was 93 when he died. Maybe he was losing his mind a little bit, thinking he was seeing ghosts? She read on. January 19th. Brenda B. came by today, all worked up, trying to figure out what Althea is saying and what to do about it. Kept talking about how she's studying every holy book she can get her hands on, aiming to understand God's word. I quoted St. Augustine to her. If you understand it, it isn't God. Gave her a cup of chamomile tea. That was interesting. But then came another mystifying one. January 30th. String theory. M theory? 11 dimensions. Gravity waves. Alternate universes? Possible leakage between one universe and another? Amazing stuff. M says his research is very promising. Maybe he thought he'd slip into an alternate dimension in the back bedroom and seen a ghost, somehow. Which one was the back bedroom, anyhow? Nicky left the sleeping Otis and went down to the 2nd floor, hoping to catch sight of the ghost herself. It was clear which one was the back bedroom. Its window looked out over the backyard. She saw no ghost in that room, but through the window she saw Grover, who was probably waiting for his father. He was walking along the low wall that bordered the concrete terrace and crouching down every now and then to study the ground, maybe looking for more creatures to capture. She watched him for a minute. He was definitely good-looking. She liked the springy way he moved, and his floppy hair more or less covered up his sticking-out ears. She couldn't fall in love with him, of course, because of the snakes and the baby mouse, but she decided to go out and talk to him anyway. When Grover saw her come outside, he beckoned to her and she bent over to him. Listen, he said, in an urgent whisper. I want to show you something amazing. No human eye has ever lit on it before. Nicky was wary. Is it about snakes? No, no, said Grover. I told you, no one has ever seen this. Not even you? Not even me. Well, what is it? Nicky said. Grover reached into his lunch bag and brought out a small green apple. I've seen apples before, Nicky said. Yeah, but watch this. Grover took out his pocket knife, pulled the blade out, and sliced the apple in half across the middle. He pointed to the inside, the white flesh oozing juice, the 5 little seeds in a star shape. I've seen that too, said Nicky. No, you haven't, Grover said. No one has. Not a single person has ever seen the inside of this apple until now. It is a completely new sight to the human eye. He took a big bite out of one half of the apple and stood there chewing, with a wide, satisfied smile across his face. Oh, you think you're so clever, Nicky said. She grabbed the other half of the apple out of his hand. She was annoyed at being tricked, but she couldn't help smiling a little too. What he'd said was true, after all. An idea popped into her head. I know something you've never seen before, she said. No human eye has ever seen it or will see it. That doesn't make sense, said Grover, munching on his apple. Yes, it does. I'll show you. But if you show me, then I'll have seen it. No, you won't, said Nicky. Just wait here. I'll go get it. She ran inside, went to her bedroom, and came back out clutching a piece of paper. She held it out. Do you know what this is? Grover peered at it. It's some fake monster out of a science fiction movie, he said. Nope, said Nicky. It's a dust mite. In this picture, it's magnified many, many zillion times. You'll never see it in real life because it's smaller than the eye can see. Ha, said Grover. He looked up at her and quirked an eyebrow. Where'd you get it? I cut it out of a magazine. I like strange, interesting things. You don't like snakes, though, Grover said. Probably you're afraid of them. I am not. You never want to see a snake eat a mouse? Maybe I would. As soon as she said this, she realized it was true. It would be a horrible thing to see, but interesting. And it might help her decide if there was something evil about this boy or not. Really? Grover looked surprised. Really? I don't believe you. You're just saying that to sound big. This was somewhat true, but Nicky wasn't going to admit it. Just tell me when, she said. I'll come and see it. So he said she could come the next day about 3:30, and he told her how to get to his house. Just in time, she remembered not to say she already knew where he lived. Crystal got back around 5. She came in the front door, her cheeks red with cold and her eyes sparkling, talking and talking about the lovely scenery in the surrounding hills. This really is a gorgeous area, she said. I had such a wonderful time. Good, said Nicky, not really listening. And Len told me some interesting things about Yonwood, Crystal said. A woman here has had some kind of religious experience, apparently. People think it means Yonwood is some sort of chosen place, and they'll be safe even if there's a war. Nicky started paying closer attention. Does Len think that? He doesn't know what to think, Crystal said, flinging her coat on a chair. He was in school with the Prophet person. She was a shy, bookish little girl, he said. Not the type to grab for attention. So he thinks maybe what happened to her is real. Have you heard anything about it? A little, Nicky said, trying to look uninterested. Tomorrow, said Crystal, I'm going to have my hair done at the local beauty shop. I'll probably come out looking like a dandelion, but at least that'll be better than this mess. She swatted at her bangs. Good idea, said Nicky, though she thought Crystal looked fine as she was. After that, Crystal went on, I'm going into Asheville for some shopping. I don't suppose you want to come? No, Nicky said, I don't want to come. What are you going to do? Oh, nothing much, Nicky said. She didn't think it was a good idea to mention snakes or mice. You're such a good girl, Crystal said. All this time on your own, and you never get bored or get into trouble. It's amazing. Nicky just smiled. End of chapter 14.